All right, next up, collaboration, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I will turn this over to Joseph Coates.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Everybody can see and hear me. We were having technical difficulties earlier in the week, so I wanted to make sure that
I think it's looking
we
good.
could.
I can see your presentation and I can hear you. Hopefully everyone else can say the same.
Fantastic. That's, yeah. Best case scenario, the camera actually doesn't work. I'd be fine with that today. Anyway, um, so my name is Joe Coates. I'm the reference librarian manager and the university archivist for Purdue University Northwest. For those of you unfamiliar with Northwest Indiana, um, the 5 county area in the northwest corner of Lake County, Porter County, LaPorte County, Newton, and Jasper County all make up what we call the Calumet region, otherwise known as the region. We are too much like Chicago for Indiana to want us, and we are too much like Indiana for Illinois to adopt us. I believe I had a friend of mine who was a historian who referred to us as the Quebecois of the United States, of the Midwest. So, what we're going to go over are some of the projects that we've conducted over the past 3 years or so and ongoing here at Purdue University Northwest. We tried to do a lot of experiential learning and a lot of community outreach over the past half decade in order to give ourselves a better footprint in Northwest Indiana. While being in Northwest Indiana, we really weren't of Northwest Indiana. We were sort of the college that people went to if they didn't want to go downstate, or we were a commuter campus for locals or to take a few tech classes before you get accepted to West Lafayette, something like that. So, in order to try to change our reputation and our kind of marketing and our audience, we were really looking to do some outreach, and the University Archive really fit into that mold. We were able to do some real world projects, not only with other organizations, but with our students. So all of these projects have some sort of student involvement. They have a lot of interdepartmental faculty and staff collaboration. We worked with quite a few outside agencies, and part of we didn't want to just be a labor pool for the community. Being in higher ed, our big goal was to make sure that we were teaching the importance of primary sources, the importance of all archives, really, in general, and to teach information literacy. One of the things that we see on a regular basis is the fact that we have so many people that are getting misinformation and don't know how to handle information, so we wanted to teach that. By the way, I'm playing a little game that I like to call Look for Typos on Joe's PowerPoints that seem to happen every time I do a presentation, so keep your eye out for that. So we did 4 projects, and all of these projects had different scopes and different purposes. The first one was the Barker Mansion Archive Project, and we're going to go into these in more detail. The second was the history of Purdue North Central, which actually turned out to be the history, which turned out to be a book project, a collaborative book project where myself and somebody else did the editing and collaboration for it. The third project was an oral history project that we conducted using a lot of students. These were graduate level communication students and history students. And then finally, the Celebrating Naomi Anderson Civil Rights Project, which that's not the official name, but the official name is slightly convoluted. And this is an ongoing project that we're working with, and I want to touch on some of this one a little bit more because this was kind of an eye-opening project for me. So when we talk about Purdue University Northwest, we're really talking about the story of two universities. Both of these universities were established in 1947. There were some earlier iterations of it that involved taking classes at local high schools, sending faculty from West Lafayette up to Northwest Indiana to cover courses, things like that. But really, both the campuses started thanks to the GI Bill and the need for a better educated industrial base in the region. So if you are familiar at all with Northwest Indiana, the two campuses were established. One was in Lake County, Hammond ended up being its final home after a few little moves. And the second one is in LaPorte County, just south of Michigan City, Indiana. So they're about 40 minutes apart, right down the toll road if you take that route. And we have a different focus and a different demographic for most of our history. The Hammond campus was very much, or what was then called Purdue University Calumet, was very much focused on the steel mills and heavy industry. We had the engineering programs, or the larger engineering programs. We did a lot of work with steel mills, railroads, water reclamation, things like that. A lot of school teachers, a lot of nursing, your normal, like, sort of what you would consider a commuter campus type system. In Westville, they had a similar, it was similar, but they were always substantially smaller. At one point, they had 58 students during the mid-50s, and they almost went under, but they stuck around. And if you're familiar at all with the area in Hammond in Lake County, you have a lot of people like myself who are either children of steelworkers or are steelworkers themselves. In LaPorte County, it's not unusual to get stuck behind a combine on your way to work. It's very rural. It's surrounded by corn. Corn or beans, depending on what year that's going in that field. In 2016, we unified to make one university. So when we started out, we had Purdue University Calumet and then Purdue University North Central, and they combined in 2016 to become Purdue University Northwest. So one of our goals when we were looking at this was these projects was we wanted to create a new culture, sort of reinventing ourselves. And we were kind of afraid of losing some of our culture that we had of the past universities. And we wanted to do some experiential learning and a lot of community outreach with these projects. It seemed like an ideal time to do that. So the Barker Mansion, and by the way, these slides are not the best. I'm kind of over the whole PowerPoint. It's death by PowerPoint, so I just have this to kind of let you see what we're going over. So the Barker Mansion was established by John Barker right after the Civil War, and he had what later became a subsidiary of Pullman. So he did work with trains and all that. The Barker Mansion still exists. It's in Michigan City. It's now a national landmark. It's a beautiful place. If you ever get the chance, check it out. One of the major exports from Northwest Indiana at the time was actually sand. All those beautiful sand dunes that are now that are now a national park. They used to cut them apart and load them into trains and sell it all over the country for landfill. A lot of it went to Chicago to establish the fill in a lot of the swampy areas there. So the head of the Barker Mansion contacted us and said, hey, we really want to save a lot of our archival collection, but we don't have the funding for an archive. We're going to write a grant. Myself and a history professor acted as the consultants for this project. So we were able to get a grant together with them. We were able to sort of turn it into a graduate level course where the graduate assistants were paid to work on this archive at the Barker Mansion. We still use Archon, and we allow the Barker Mansion to use Archon to store their finding aids, and they link to us through that. And this project went without a hitch. They had the space. We had really thought it through. We had funding and equipment. I think they bought like a scanner, a MacBook Pro, a lot of boxes and folders and all that stuff. So we got them a basic start, and the students would work with me, and I would go over on occasion to work with them. And it is still usable. So that was my first time thinking this collaboration thing is really easy. No problem, right? The second project that we did, because of our history as two separate universities, we didn't want to lose the history of both locations. And that led to the book project. So what you see on the screen is the Purdue University Calumet First 50 Years, written by a unfortunately now deceased gentleman named Lance Trusty. He was a longtime professor of history at Purdue Calumet. He used to tell everybody that he came with the plumbing when they built the building. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year, and I would have liked for him to have seen the book that we completed. So for the 50-year anniversary, he had run which was in 1994, 96? I should really know that, but it slips my mind right now. He had used a lot of student work to write this book. And this was a faculty project with student research. And it was really kind of the go-to resource for the university. If you needed a date or a photo or something like that, people would really go to the book for that at the Calumet campus. It really did make everyone's life easier there. So a little bit just about my employment with Purdue University Calumet. I hired in right before unification, knowing full well that I was going to be the archivist at 2 locations. So when I started there, this book really was a lifesaver. And I realized when I got to Purdue North Central that they had never had anything like this before. And a matter of fact, they didn't even have an archive. So in the picture is my first student worker that I had at Purdue University North Central. Her name is Jackie Perkins, and she had thought that she wanted to be an archivist, and after this semester-long experience, she decided that she would rather be a museum curator and is now going to, I believe, Wright State in their graduate program to work in museums. So one of the things that I've told every intern that I've had is if you do this and you realize that you hate it, you didn't pay for graduate school first to realize that you hate your job. If you hate it when you're an undergraduate, you can still get an A and make up your mind later on. So the idea was to do a PNC book. So we were I was going to write a book, and I started learning a lot of the history of writing books there. And there were a lot of started projects that got some traction and then died off. Some of them died off due to disagreements between faculty and administration. There was a lot of court intrigue and politics and things like that. So they didn't have a lot of luck. But what we decided to do was actually make this a student-driven project, because in order to be a good historian, you need to actually know how to write and know how to do primary source research. So we set out we split the book into, I believe, 5 chapters. Well, it ended up being 7. I wrote the introduction, and Dr. Jim Pula, who just recently retired, wrote the conclusion. and we had 5 graduate students write the book for the university. So I'm sorry, I misspoke. Graduate students and 400 level history students for their capstone course that they had to take for history. There were a few things that we did well. There were a few things that we didn't do well. The project took 18 months from start to finish. We had thought that it would take about 12 months, and we grossly underestimated that time. Every student asked for an extension, which was okay because we did end up with a better product, but we should have planned for that. We also, finding the right students was a bit of a challenge. We had quite a few that were interested, and we were warned by other faculty that no, not that one. You don't want that one. Okay, good to know. How to split up the work, so we had figured that out. Where to publish, that was a little more of a challenge than we thought. We had thought that we could go through Purdue University Press because, we're Purdue, which was true. We could go through them. However, what we found was with the University Press at Purdue, they have 2 different presses. They have the scholarly press, and then they have the secondary press. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. And we would not be able to use the one because it was not a peer-reviewed scholarly book in Purdue's eyes. So it would have cost about $10,000 to have the layout and the publishing done, which when your budget is $0, $10,000 does not fit into that budget. I'm not a mathematician, and that was kind of self-evident there. At the end, when we looked at it, we thought, well, what is the worst case scenario for this project? And when we looked at it, we thought, well, we will have a complete, if not poorly written, history of the university that we can keep in a box in the archive and sort of go to have the history of it. So we decided to run with it. And our final project was this. At one time, we were ranked 1.2 million on Amazon, so that's pretty proud. I had a book in the top 1.2 million on a worldwide platform. Pretty exciting stuff there. But what we ended up doing was we used Kindle Direct Publishing because it was basically free. We had 7 authors, 2 editors, a few extensions, and some luck that this came through. I learned indexing, and I'm glad that I did not take it with my MLS program. It was not. It really was mind-numbing and terrible. KDP, like I said, was our answer. Our experience with them was really good. We were able to get everything submitted fairly easily. We got a draft back, and then we edited the draft. I think we had to Photoshop a few of the photos. Just for clarity, we had to brighten up a few, darken a few. There were some odd things like it put a barcode over a barcode for some reason. There were some oddities to it. But we were able to do this fairly easily. When I said a local charity was the beneficiary, one of the issues that we had, and I think this was somebody not really wanting to do some work, was we tried to go through the business office to have the money go directly. So any of the proceeds from the book would go to fund basically a small fund for the university archive to buy supplies. We didn't, neither Jim nor myself wanted our name on, to get any proceeds from it, and we didn't want to cut checks every year to people for royalties for a book that probably isn't going to sell very well. So we got a lot of pushback from our own institution for that, for whatever reason. Business office had business reasons, I guess. So what we did was when we created the account, we had the Barker Mansion fill out the financial part of it. So any proceeds for that book goes directly into the Barker Mansion for their archive project. So it worked out well for us. Since we sustain part of their archive, or we helped them out with that. We feel that that was a good thing. Um, if I can go back for a second, when we talked about the Barker Mansion earlier, one of the reasons why they approached us was not because we were the college that was 15 minutes away who volunteered to help, but when Purdue Calumet and Purdue North Central were in their infancy, um, the Hammond campus had started out in an abandoned bank, which is now a Montessori school. They eventually moved into a building that was built by Inland Steel, and then they started building their own buildings after that. Purdue North Central, on the other hand, lived a nomad existence for a little bit longer than that, right up until the early 50s. And what ended up happening is that the Barker family, Catherine Barker Hickok is her name, had moved to New York. She was a rich socialite, lived in New York with her family. They donated the Barker Mansion to Purdue, and Purdue held classes in that mansion for 25 years until they built where the campus currently is, and then it became a national landmark after that. So there's a lot of they're sort of our adopted part of our adopted family, so we do help them out. So this project worked well, but it did have an unrealistic timeline. Although I would say first two projects down, so we had Barker Mansion, everything went swimmingly. Second one was the book, and other than learning how to index and some other little issues of timeline and dealing with business office things and formatting, it went surprisingly smooth for especially I don't think 18 months is even really a bad time frame for that. We had to scan photos and everything for that. That was we were building the archive at Purdue North Central when we were doing the research to do that. So 18 months wasn't bad. The oral history project was another story. This was the first one that made me question why I'm trying to do these things. So it started, I had a graduate student working in the archive, and he had a background in video editing, and he wanted to look through the AV collection to see if there were things that we could digitize. And we found a box of cassettes from the mid-70s that were, well, there were numerous boxes, but we found one from the mid-70s that was old faculty members who had started at the beginning there and had were sat down with and talked to. The first one, her name was Sigrid Stark. She was the first female tenured faculty at Purdue, I believe. She showed up to interview in 1946, still wearing, I can't remember if it was her Waves uniform or her Wax uniform right after the war, and told them that they were hiring her and she was going to go teach English, and she did. She grew up in a dirt floor house in South Dakota right around the turn of the century, and we do have a literary award named after her. So we found these cassettes, and we thought, hey, can we digitize these with some quality in-house? So with a cassette player and a Zoom and a couple other odds and ends, we were able to get the quality that we found acceptable. When your budget is zero, I believe we had touched on earlier that sometimes there's the right way to do things, and then there's the way that you do things in order to, keep these items. So once we figured out that we were able to digitize these, we thought, hey, this is a lot of great information from, a lot of the people that started at Purdue in the 40s and 50s, and sort of the background. And now that we're a new institution, we don't want to lose the institutional history from the two places. So why don't we do our own? So this ended up being collaboration, super fun. It was going to be taught by myself, a professor from the communication department, and a professor from the history department. And we were going to teach, I think, for 6 weeks, 5 weeks at the beginning, and then a final project at the end. And the rest of the project was going to be the students going and finding people to interview for this project from both campuses. So it was a little ambitious, and we thought, hey, you guys can do this. It'll be fine. So it was a graduate level class, experiential learning project. So they had to interview 3 former faculty or staff in the end, and we really wanted a good variety between the 2 campuses. This project, however, was not as successful. We had some oddities which I didn't really foresee. Pardon me. So we co-taught the course, and we covered the importance of oral history, how to do interviews. The communication professor had been a executive at Marshall Fields doing marketing for decades before he was teaching here. We taught them how to use equipment, the parameters of the project, and then a go time after that. What we didn't anticipate was kind of a lack of participation or a lack of drive on the part of the students. They really wanted to sort of be spoon-fed a lot of the project, which was not our bargain since, it's graduate school. We had thought that it would make it easier on us to have common history majors do this in a graduate program because we thought, hey, graduate program, we've already vetted these students. It didn't go as well as we thought it would. I had 2 students that just sort of left. They didn't drop the class, but we never saw them again, and they didn't turn anything in. Don't know what that was. And this is pre-COVID, so this was last fall. So it's not like they got sick and had to drop or something, at least that we know of. However, in the end, we did end up with 13 interviews from various people. We host them to Kaltura. Purdue pays for a Kaltura subscription, so we were able to use that platform, which is nice because we were able to use we could upload both MP3 and MP4 and then embed everything in our small AV repository. We use Omeka for that, and it worked out really well for that. So that project wasn't great, but it's usable and it's informative. It reminds me much more of like the interview your grandpa type project. It's kind of how some of them ended up. So that was a little bit disappointing, but in the end, we did have some quality interviews for that are usable. So the last project is the one that we are currently in, and this is one of those things that I'm really out of my wheelhouse on, and it really made me think about what are some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of this of our field, and what are some things that may come up that people may not have thought about this. I was approached in January. One of our local, she's a local retired attorney, and she found that Michigan City, Indiana, had a long lost, forgotten suffragette named Naomi Anderson. So she was born, she was a woman of color. She was born in Michigan City free, traveled throughout, ended up dying in San Francisco around 1906, 1907. She headlined a few speeches on women's rights and civil rights. She headlined over Susan B. Anthony a few times. and this is somebody who was sort of lost to history. So I was approached by them asking if I would be the historian for this, and I didn't know what this commitment would really be, and so I said, sure, because I'm kind of gullible. And our goal, or our overall goal for this project is to remember her in, oh, look, there's my typo, inspire civic engagement to young women, people of color, um, and this is an ongoing project. We ended up getting a grant through the Indiana Humanities this year because we were doing. I think it's because we were during the 100-year anniversary of women's suffrage, and we had found a woman of color who was a suffragette. I think that helped us quite a bit, especially this year. Um, so it was a $40,000 grant for this project. Just to go back to that real quick, that's going to be an ongoing thing. We're going to have an education sort of a setup for that. We're going to have some public art that's going to be part of this project. That's going to be in Michigan City, and this involves working with different civic groups in Northwest Indiana, and especially in Michigan City. So some of the things that came up after I really started thinking about this project and the other projects that I had in mind are kind of what I want to touch on. And there's a few other things, and then we'll be open for discussion. I'm sure other people have ended up in slightly odd situations like this. People don't know what we do as archivists. People really, I don't know a better way to put it, but people don't know what we do. I thought it was, I don't know what I thought. Every year, because I co-teach every year the historiography class that all of our undergraduates have to take. So I do a whole section on archives and records management and museum studies programs and historians and how we're all different. But the general public really does not know what we do. And we don't do a good job of communicating what we are and what we do. I don't know if this is me or if it's everybody else having issues like this, but a lot of times you'll tell somebody, no, I'm not a historian, I'm an archivist, and it just doesn't seem to really click. Part of that problem, I think, is when we looked at the grant, when I looked at the grant for the Indiana Humanities, which I helped him co-write, for a historian, it lists that you can have to have a historian on your staff for the grant. You can have a historian, or a librarian, and you think to yourself, you're like, you may want to be a little more specific on that. However, there are other things. You can do projects without a large budget or even no budget. The one project that we did, the P&W book project or the PNC book project, it ended up costing me $65 out of pocket because Jim and I bought copies for all the students out of our own pocket to give to them. So that was, $50 for 18 months of work. Here you go, guys. But we were able to accomplish it with time, not a lot of money. Always check your collection development policy. A lot of times we sort of don't update those as we should, and really when people start asking us for assistance on things, we need to really make sure our collection development policy and what we're actually doing sort of mesh together. We might be getting more and more questions and decide, hey, we really need to look at our collection development policy and what we do here. We're not married to that policy, but we need to make sure that those are both up to snuff. Sometimes the good is better than perfect, so if you get a good product in the end and it's not perfect and it's not the way that you really wanted it, but it's something that's usable and findable for the community, that works. Vetting isn't always effective. Sometimes you think you've got a good student or good volunteers or something, and it can backfire on you. And finally, this goes back to the ancient days when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and I was a much younger man and spent my formative years in the United States Navy, which would be the KISS principle of keep it simple, stupid. If you're working with students and volunteers and people who are not professional archivists or professional historians or professional, like, you can't give overly complicated tasks. It doesn't work out well. You really have to. We had another thing that we said break it down Barney style, like Barney the dinosaur, like make it so a toddler can understand it. Don't use terms that you have to look up on occasion. Really keep it as simple as possible. And there was finally one thing that made me think of it when Abby brought up at the last part. Know your audience. I was approached by a group of um, women, African American women, and older white women to be the historian for the project. And it didn't occur to me, maybe because I'm a middle aged white male, that, hey, maybe I'm not your best choice for this project. Um, and I brought that up after about a month, and I thought, do you really want me for this? We can find somebody else that you would find more appropriate. And they did not agree with that. They thought that I was a good choice because they felt that I was uh, a local who really believed in civic engagement and women's rights and voting rights and all that. So that worked out well. But know your audience, know if you have privilege, what your privilege is, and make sure that that's addressed at the beginning. Are some of the little things that I picked up on this. So I'm going to stop yammering here and turn my screen off and entertain any questions that anybody may have.
All right, let me take a look here in the chat. We don't have any questions. We got a shout out from Danielle, a former intern.
Mm. So you one of the little things that they were talking about earlier during lunch with the students wanting advice. When you do find good interns, make sure you keep contact with them because Danielle was the first intern I ever had, and one day I might need to have her get me a job if things don't go that well. So always keep good contacts in just in case. Um, Within a matter of a few years, she was already better at this than I was. So that's how that works sometimes.
Go Danielle. All right, and then we have our next presentation starts in 2 minutes. So I'm gonna ask last chance for any questions for Joe about his presentation. Oh, we got one question. What rights did you retain with the PNC book? Interesting comment about university presses. Not the first time I've heard that. They seem to prefer external.
Because we asked for because of them all being openly accessible in the archive, we waived our rights to it. It is open source or open access.
All right. This presentation